Dr. Vroonland, thank you for participating in our Culture Catalyst.
Absolutely,
interviews.
it's my pleasure.
You're a perfect candidate to talk about creating culture in your district, so very excited to have this conversation with you. And we're going to just go through a few questions, and feel free to share anything that's on your mind, because
Thank you.
everyone can learn from what you do as a leader.
Well, I certainly hope so. Yeah. Well, thank you. Looking forward to this.
Very good. So I've heard a little of your story before, and it's really a great story, but I want to capture that. Why did you choose to work in education?
Well, you know, as a young man, I was born into an unusual situation, or I should say unusual for some, but sadly not for everyone. And I was born to a single parent. Mom was in her teenage years, and poverty was a part of our life. And a sister was born a year later. And because of the situation, this was the 1960s, and before the Johnson administration, so the support for children simply wasn't there. And so Mom did the only thing she knew she could do, and put us into foster care, I believe at the age of 3. I spent the next 7 years in different, well, I should say the next couple of years in different homes until I landed ultimately with the Rosines in Waterloo, Iowa. And, you know, through that experience of growing up in a foster home, and we had as many as 20 kids at any given moment in that home, in and out, I really, I guess I got to understand the significance of people contributing to other people. The Rosines were fantastic foster parents, but I also got the opportunity to live a life that was somewhat unique. I think by the time I was 10, I had had 5 different names. My last name, obviously the Vroonlands, in 1974, I was adopted by the Vroonlands' entire different family, and I remember that experience of taking the 2 grocery bags I had. Back then they were paper grocery bags, filled with the stuff I had, sitting in the back of a car alone, driving from Waterloo, Iowa to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, getting a new room, a new house, a new family, new name, new school, new friends, new church, everything new at age of 10. And I think it was obviously a couple years later, that was very traumatic. Obviously for any 10-year-old that would be traumatic. But I think a couple years later, what I kind of figured out quickly was there were some sustaining forces in my life. And that I'm glad they were there. The first and most important was I always had someone who loved me, regardless of that very difficult start in life. You know, I had people who cared deeply about me, and I remember specifically even one Christmas feeling especially valued when some men showed up to my house with toys, and just lots of toys. And you know, it was interesting because I didn't know those men, and they didn't know me, and yet they were bringing me gifts. And I think I learned a lot about charity and generosity through that. Didn't know it at the time, but it's been a memory I've never forgotten. And that expression of love through generosity has been a part of my life ever since. The other sustaining piece, frankly, was faith and my church. And regardless of which family I was in, that was always a part of our life. And my relationship with pastors, and I think probably the pastors took special care for me because of my situation, I really developed a strong faith through that process. And then the last sustaining piece and key to it was education. Schools, for me, I knew early on, schools were kind of my way of being as good as anyone, regardless of the circumstance of my birth. And I really took that in. So by the time I was 18, I knew I was going to be a lawyer or a minister or an educator, and all in the same pathway to serve. And chose education because I felt like that was where I was designed, and to go and have the most impact, frankly. And you know, and I tell people all the time, I think education, sadly, has been somewhat devalued to be this place of college and career readiness, and that is absolutely a function of ours, but it is not our purpose. And I talk to our staff here a lot about our purpose, and I believe in it because of the circumstances of my life. I believe in it. And Thomas Jefferson said this, so everyone in my district gets to hear this, whether they want to hear it or not, and they hear it a lot. In fact, some probably could quote it. and that is that the purpose of a general education is to enable every man to determine for himself those things that will secure or endanger their freedom. And I believe in that strongly. My freedom is a result of my education, and specifically my education in the public sector. My freedom is informed by my faith, and my freedom was guaranteed ultimately by the love that people had for me. So I really take this very seriously. When you look at teachers today, they really provide all three of those functions. They provide a level of love. And here's the thing, I'm not implying that children from poverty or bad situations aren't loved. I was. They need more. And I do believe that, and I needed that, and I had people who contributed that. And so teachers do that every day. And teachers provide a sense of stability in an otherwise very unstable situation. And I know that's not faith at its purest level, but it is, in my way of looking at it, faith is a stabilizing force in life. And thus the teacher provides that. And then ultimately the teacher provides the education to inform the mind of the young person so they can make those choices that they need to make to determine the quality of their freedom. So that's why I became an educator.
Love it. I love that quote. The first time you told it to me, it stuck with me. And actually, when we went to Monticello, it was like, it changed the way I thought about that place,
Right.
going and thinking about that quote. So this is a total aside, personal. I don't know the answer to this, but I never knew. So did you not know the Vroonlands before?
I did not.
They adopted you. Okay, so they were not a foster parent of yours.
No. The Vroonlands were looking to have children, and they couldn't have children.
Okay.
And they surprisingly reached out to a 10-year-old.
That's what is so surprising.
And adopted me on February 3rd, 1974, and on February 6th, 1974, Mom found out she was pregnant.
Wow.
And so I have a brother, Eric, who's 10 years younger than me.
Wow. Wow.
And so, so I actually grew up with a brother who irritated the tick out of me as an older kid, but I love my brother, and he's doing quite well living here in Dallas as well. So,
very good. Very good. I did not know that. Okay. That's interesting. When you said you moved in the backseat of that car, I was like, well, so you didn't know them before?
No.
I didn't realize that. Okay. So great. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. We're so glad that you chose to work in education.
I am too. I've been blessed by it. I've probably been blessed more by it than I've blessed others, but I try.
I think it's mutually beneficial. And I know this is a little off script also, but I know you have strong feelings, and you mentioned it briefly about public education specifically. Will you expound on that just a little bit? Especially as you're tying it back to what
Absolutely.
you're saying.
And I have very strong feelings, and they relate to our purpose and function. Public education, especially as it has been developed and as it has even evolved over time. I know it hasn't evolved as fast as many of us would like, but it has evolved. It serves a unique purpose in a democracy of ensuring that we have a protected form of government. And I am very, very almost borderline nationalistic. I believe so strongly in the American dream and what we are about, but it doesn't work without a public education system. Because what you end up with a failed public education system is a system that serves the elite. I don't have a problem with private education at all. I believe it serves an important purpose, frankly. I don't have a problem with competition in that realm. My struggle is when we have representatives who have been elected to serve a very specific function, to defend and promote public education, are doing exactly the opposite. That concerns me greatly because I think it's short-sighted. I think it fails to see the potential negative impact of a education system that is not as strongly public as the one is currently. Vouchers and charters are not public ed. And I'm not saying this to be negative about charters. The people who work in charters serve a similar function, but the money is serving a business purpose. We have to, in education, serve the purpose of education, not profit. And my concern is that charters are primarily about profit. And I'm not talking about the mom and dad charters that occasionally pop up, as we all know. I'm talking about these for-profit public entities that are serving the purpose of lining pockets. And we should be concerned about that, not because we're anti-business. I'm pro-business. I want to have many startups coming out of our schools as any, but not in the public school sector, because once we start serving money rather than children, that will become a problem.
So I think you, maybe better than anyone, exemplify what I think is really difficult for people to grapple with, this balance, which is you 100% believe in public education and want it to thrive, and yet you're not critical of public education. You feel like it has grown and evolved, and yet you are still trying to innovate in public education and make it better. And so that kind of anomaly, can you explain that, like the idea that just because you're trying to make it better doesn't mean that you're against it or you're critical of it?
Well, it's not too dissimilar to my faith. And the truth is, I have a faith and I do my best in my faith, but what I know I need to do is better. I need to evolve. I need to get better at everything I do always. Education is not dissimilar to that. We serve the purpose of educating children, and we are a far cry from perfection in that service, but our efforts are not. And that's what frustrates me. And our stories get lost sometimes by the narratives of people who have different desires for public ed. My desire is for public ed to work, and to work really well and to thrive. The realities are we can do a better job, and we should constantly strive to do a better job. I will share this. I think the greatest inhibitor to this is the accountability system. Mm-hmm. I think it has killed efforts to truly innovate. It has created compliance systems all across the state. The state itself is designing a compliance system with the accountability tool, the very thing that the state should be running away from, the very thing that is in opposition to American culture. Our culture was never designed to be compliant. From the day we started, we were not designed to be a compliant culture, and yet our state is trying to make our school systems operate as compliance officials to them. Yeah. I'm frustrated by that, because that actually limits our ability to innovate and improve the system. What ends up happening in any compliance structure is you have a ceiling. And the ceiling, sadly, plays out on the least of us, more than it does on those of us who have advantages. So if you're coming from poverty and you are disadvantaged at birth, that ceiling will top you out just because of the circumstances. And so you're only going to get so far. And my way of looking at that is, there are a few children who are going to do really well, but the vast majority are going to kind of peak. Our schools are the same way. They're peaking, and you can look at the data. They're peaking because compliance simply only takes you so far. And I was telling the story this morning. It's like JCPenney's versus Amazon. If you really want to be great, you have to be willing to innovate the system, to be nimble, to change, and change quickly. We've got to be able to do that in our schools, and accountability is holding us back from that. Now, that being said, I'm not opposed to being accountable. I just believe in an ownership model, and the way you become accountable in an ownership model is to turn from looking to what do we do for the state to who am I truly accountable to and for, and that's the children in this community, the community itself, and the board is the best entity to hold me and this district accountable.
I want to talk more about part of what we're kind of getting at there with your legacy, but we'll take it lighter for a second. Okay. So first of all, tell us a story about you as a young, I know you've been in education for your entire career. Tell us a story about what was the young David Vroonland like as a teacher or an administrator?
I'll talk about a teacher, I guess. Okay. I loved teaching, and so did I really did. I taught American history of course I did, and economics and psychology. So I taught all the social sciences. Even got to teach English in Japan. Really? And I would say I had so many great experiences as a teacher. They're just, and really I think the thing that's about being a teacher is about forming relationships with kids and helping them to see themselves as more than they are, yes, or more than they see themselves as. I'm sorry, and that was something I think was pretty common for me. I don't know why. And I wasn't the kind of teacher who was like super close. I wasn't that guy. Some of the teachers you see are just buddy. Everyone. my students liked me. They enjoyed my classes, but we challenge kids' perspectives on a regular basis. For me, that was the great value of teaching. I taught English in Japan. I did the same thing. I would challenge Japanese kids thinking on literature, because that's what we do. I think there's another quote by Jefferson that speaks about the tyranny over the mind of man. And I think our job is to make sure that doesn't happen, that we're constantly building the thinking of children so that they truly are self-determined adults. And for me, that's just been my life experience in education has been a complete joy. I've made some mistakes in my time. We all have. But in honesty, I think I have been now doing this 32 years, and I just have loved every bit of it.
So tell us what kind of student you were in high school.
Oh. I would say I had a lazy mind. I actually, that's not entirely true. I was, when it came to the social sciences of any sort, psychology, history, government, economics, loved them all.
That's what fired you up.
Loved them all. Just, I think, learning about how people function. I was never so much into what day did this battle occur. That was never my thing. It was more about understanding the people and their thinking. And I still am always impressed as I think about the small group of people who actually were the impetus for forming this nation. A nation and a very small group of people. It's amazing what that teaches us about life. If we are committed, if we feel strongly, if we're able to articulate, if we're able to cast a vision, we don't need a whole bunch of people to do it. We just need to do it. And that's kind of how our nation was formed, by people who were like that. And they weren't perfect by any stretch. None of us are, and with the exception of one that I'm aware of in history. So I think that I really enjoyed that as a student. If you'd asked me about science as a student, I mean, that was rough, especially chemistry. I was not a good student. I was a decent athlete. I liked athletics. But when I went to college, that's when I really learned what it was like to be a student, because my first year was not good. I enjoyed school, I really did, but I wasn't, one of those kids who studied really hard. But I did fine in school. I was just one of those kind of guys. A few pranks. The good thing was I didn't get caught, because the principal lived literally 2 doors down.
Oh.
So yeah, that was not good. Yeah, it's like I can't.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say on camera what those pranks were, but if you want to learn about them later, I'm happy to tell you.
Yes, I do.
Yeah,
for sure. So, tell us a little bit about you're trying to change culture here in your district specifically, and this is your third year, right? Mm-hmm. So, what is the culture that you're trying to create here, and what kind of behaviors are you trying to model? What are you trying to do with that?
Right. What I think is really important is building an ownership culture. In an ownership culture, you distribute the leadership, you decentralize the system. And the role of the central office, if you will, is to resource the needs of a campus, either from a physical need or from a learning need, right, to build their capacity to be more effective. And I believe strongly in distributing leadership to its point of responsibility as much as possible. So we really want to focus on building strong teacher leaders. I've even moved away, and I get criticized for this a lot, but I don't believe that the principal is the instructional leader of a campus. I never have. The principal's job is to develop strong instructional leaders. Those instructional leaders should be teachers, and they should feel empowered and ultimately responsible for the performance of their students. And I think what has happened in cultures that have developed during the last 20 years of accountability is you've developed these kind of compliance structures where teachers don't feel empowered. They feel like consumers of central office ideas, central office growth models, central office sales jobs, and they feel devalued as a result of that. It limits their satisfaction in the job, and it has led to a loss in the number of teachers in the system and a loss in the number of teachers applying to come into the system. we've got to build models that really value the teacher. Now, I understand we've got to know, and I get that. In an ownership model, you know by getting eyes on. Ronald Reagan once said, "Trust but verify" when it came to the Russians. I believe in that, right? And yeah, that's kind of appropriate these days, right? But he said it a long time ago related to the missile, bringing down the number of missiles, right? And all these negotiations, he wanted to have eyes on. And yet in public ed, what we have done is we've relied on data sets to tell us whether or not someone's doing well. That's just simply not the way to do it. And so in an ownership culture, you work on developing the leadership so that they have the eyes to be able to go in and see what's working, what's not working, to be able to really encourage people, to grow people, to improve themselves as it relates to the education of our children, in whatever role that is. My job, obviously, as superintendent, is to cast visions. It's to set goals. It's to really work on that culture. And so we have really worked hard to build this ownership culture in Mesquite and move away from compliance structures. And so we have a phraseology, and it's moving from obedience to ownership. I don't believe in obedience. I actually applaud the rogue teacher for the most part, as long as they stay within the parameters, right? But I like rogue teachers, because rogue teachers care more deeply about their students than they do rules. And that's me. Now, I believe in rules and I believe in things that guide us, but we still need to provide more opportunity for teachers to be innovative, to be nimble and responsive to their students. You can't do that in compliance structures. You can't do that with scripted lessons and paced curriculum. That will not work. And frankly, I don't even think those are of proper educational value personally. The other thing you have to do is you have to move away from compliance to capacity. And so the job of central office is to grow the capacity of the people in the organization so they can own it. I think telling someone to own someone without growing them in a way that allows them to do that is irresponsible. As we worked with you guys, especially focusing in the pre-K2 sector, that has been all about coaching and bringing in coaches. And as you know, we've doubled down on that in 2 years, and we've seen results from that effort. I think actually this next year will probably be the biggest growth period. It won't surprise me at all, because the first years were really about developing understanding, then making something concrete, working through that, and now we're really into that second year. But I think it's important to note, in this ownership culture we've developed, we did not experience, contrary to change management theory, an implementation dip in our performance. And I've never believed in implementation dips. I still don't. I think those occur because of a lack of capacity development prior to making change. And so I think our focuses have been well received on the part of teachers. And I've shared with you in this movement from compliance to capacity, what we're seeing is teachers are working harder. I'm hearing this from teachers. They're working harder, but they love what they're doing because they feel valued. I think there's something very powerful in that process. And then the last piece is moving from fearful to fearless. That's the hardest piece, especially in this era of accountability. Everyone's always worried. We're trying hard to move away from the idea of being test takers and being measured by that test. I am so tired of that. I'm tired of what it has done to children. I'm tired of seeing third graders measured by the state. The state has no rationale in doing that whatsoever. It serves no educational purpose. We already know how third graders are doing. Why we are testing them the way we are is really beyond my understanding, frankly. And some might call me naive. I do not believe that. If we look at the nations that are outperforming us on PISA, none of them are doing what we're doing. Not one of them. And no one wants to listen to that. Our PISA performance over the last 20 years has compressed. Over the period of accountability, it's gotten worse. Now, we have to have an accounting in the system, because the truth is there was a, what was the term that George Bush used? I'm trying to recall, soft bigotry of low expectations. There is simply no question. There was. I saw it personally, but the means by which we've tried to overcome it has failed.
Absolutely.
And so in any innovative system, when something fails, stop doing it. Exactly. You stop doing the very thing that's not working and move to something that you believe can actually get results. I think what we needed to do is cast visions that moved us away from that, cast visions around third grade reading and getting every child on grade level reading by third grade, not meeting some 80% number on a test. And then build capacity in teachers to be able to do that job, work with your community on things, and build a sense of ownership in the community around this. And perhaps we will actually have a greater dent on third grade reading than those districts that are focused on the test. And that's and that's my hope, is that we can prove this. And if we can prove this in a district with 75% free and reduced, if in 3 years we can have 80% of our kids in middle school taking a pre-AP course and 80% of our high school kids taking an AP course, we can put the narrative on its head, if you will, spin it. And because I'm tired of the narrative out there that kids from poverty cannot do this, that narrative is driven by a circular logic around accountability testing. And what we have to do is move away from that in order to be great. And so we are. But it's still hard because teachers are fearful.
So you're kind of leading towards a question that I wanted to ask, which is, what do you think your legacy is? What do you want it to be?
I want it to be about creating a new narrative for public ed. And that may be a little audacious, but I guess what's life worth living if you're not doing that, right? Is it? Roosevelt talked about not living in the gray twilight, and I don't want to be that person. I sat in a meeting where Mike Morath was presenting this summer on the state accountability system, and this is not a statement about Mike. I don't want anyone to believe I'm disrespecting him at all when I say what I'm about to say. But Mike was talking about state accountability testing and how disproportionately it affects kids who are from poverty. They just don't perform as well. We know this. That's not a surprise, right? And so in order to create, now I want you to hear this very carefully, in order to create a fair accountability system, we're going to design some tools within the state accountability system so that the impact of poverty will be somehow mediated, right? And so not every school who's an F school will be a poverty school. Now that may sound nice, but that's absolutely what we don't need to be doing. And I'm in a district with a lot of poverty. That is the last thing we need to be doing. But what Mike's dilemma is, what the commissioner's dilemma is he's having to work with a state accountability system that simply won't work.
Right.
You can't do it from the state level. And this isn't about people's intelligence. He may be one of the smartest men at the state level, right? And I say that sincerely. It's not about people's intelligence. It's about the structure of state government. So how do we create an accounting? Well, I have argued about local accountability forever, and I think it's the epitome of irony when you say to take community-based accountability and put it in the state system. I mean, that's like, what? I mean, and I'm frustrated by people who are doing that. And I don't mean disrespect to the districts who are doing that, but they're actually advocating through that process for the A through F system, which I know they know, is not good for children, not good for communities. It's frankly, it's not even factual in many cases. It's showing things that are not accurate. So how do you show your community things that are accurate? Well, you have to have an accounting. And so what we're doing here in Mesquite is we're stepping out and developing an accreditation tool for our board to actually accredit our schools. That's a massive shift from even how many would design the governance role of boards. But I believe if you're going to have an accounting, the only people who can be truly believed, if you will be the board that is elected by the local community in establishing those accountings. And so by going through an accreditation process, I believe we can communicate to our public better than the state can what is going on in our schools. And this will not be an easy process. This will be a rigorous process. So rigorous that you won't want a school to go through it more than once every 3 to 5 years. I think we're looking at about 5 years here. We are looking for even an outside business to come on board and actually give its stamp of approval to our process, and then another to train our boards in their effectiveness to do this work. I think it could be the most important work that a school board would do, is to really hold campuses accountable to their performance and the district overall. But here's the key. It's not a gotcha system. This system actually works to promote growth rather than kind of reflecting, ooh, you're a bad school, or oh, you're a good school, which are really misnomers in many cases. What we want to do is actually design it in a way that really makes the campus own their effectiveness. So to give you an example, student engagement might be a pillar or a category in one of our in our accreditation process. How is the school doing in engaging students in after-school activities or in extended activities or whatever, right? That might be one of the areas. We're discussing this with principals, and a principal said to me, well, what data set would you want me to show? And I just paused for a second, and the principal went, oh, I did it, didn't I? And I said, yes, you did. He said, I just fell into compliance. I said, absolutely. We're not going to tell you what data set. Your job as a campus is to be able to look at student engagement and say, what are we doing? What data do we need to provide our community, our board, our students to say that we are really effective in this arena? By doing that, we move to ownership. We move away from compliance. Now, I'll give you an example of why this is so important. When I came to this district, the high school principals met with me, and they sat down and they said, what do you think about walkthroughs? And I thought that was a curious question. And I said, well, they're important. I really didn't know. No, we know they're important is what they said. What we mean is we're required to do 25 a week and turn them in on Friday. And I just kind of paused a little bit. And I said, well, my first response would be, that's not enough. My second response would be, you're probably doing most of them on Friday. Because in a compliance system, and they nodded, and it was absolutely true, in a compliance system, you're all about meeting 25.
Right.
And so we spent a couple of months talking about the function and purpose of walkthroughs. We spent time doing a little bit of research and talking about the research. We spent time actually talking about how you can design your own walkthrough system rather than having a district-designed walkthrough system, which I know is contrary to everything that's been going on for the last 15 years. But in an ownership culture, you can't centralize those systems. You have to focus on capacity, not obedience. And so we worked on their capacity. I'm here to tell you they were doing well over 100 walkthroughs a week.
Wow.
And without a compliance thing in place. The vision was simply, no, the vision is quite simple. When I walk onto campus, the last place I want to see you is in your office.
Yeah.
And now we have executive directors of leadership development who get onto campuses and they walk with them to kind of be that barometer. They work with them on their plans. So we're really developing our principal leadership in this ownership culture. In a local accountability system where true ownership is occurring, you build the capacity, in this case of the board, to really be effective at going through a application process and an interview process with campuses. And I promise you, we will outperform the state without even talking about the state measure. That's what I'd like to leave. I just feel strongly that we need to change the narrative as it relates to public schools. I would like to show, as I've said throughout this interview, I'd like to be able to show that a district with 75% free and reduced can actually have more kids taking AP courses than suburban districts with 10%. So that's my goal, and that's why I'm here.
Love it. So just one other quick question about accreditation. So is it similar to like college accreditation?
Like college accreditation? Okay. In many respects, yes. And so as an example, when you go through the Southern Schools accreditation process, a little more tied to performance measures than they would do. Yeah. And many people who may not know this is our private schools in this country go through an accreditation process where they're really not evaluated on performance of students. And yet our legislature is advocating so much for private schools. And it's like, wait a minute, they're not even going through this. Their accountability is the way I believe it should be, frankly, and I believe ours should be the same. But a little more rigorous than that. But our idea is that in the 6 categories of accreditation, you would be accredited on each one with potential distinction. So there's not an overall accreditation, which is a little different. And then if you have a fail point in one of the categories, you're not accredited, you have a year you have actually a couple months to develop a plan, a year to enact it, to show that you can actually meet the accreditation standards. And those standards are a little bit unique in the way we're doing that. But what we want to be able to do, again, is focus on growth. We don't want to catch them.
Right.
We want them to
Right,
be
that's the
successful.
point, yeah.
The point in public ed is we want them to be successful. We don't want to try to prove that we're not stack rating. You know, I talked to you a little bit about stack rating before the interview. The whole stack rating process that came out of the 90s, that model, every business is walking away from now. And yet, it's the very model that our state wants to put in place. And if they don't believe the A through F is a stacking evaluation system, then they're either deceptive to themselves or they're being deceptive to someone else. I don't know which, but that's clearly what it is. And I don't believe in that process. It didn't work in the business world, and it's not going to work in this world. So we want to develop this system that really is not about stack rating our schools against each other. It's about meeting a set of expectations that our community has actually worked to help develop, and being able to communicate that back to the community that we're doing this, and if we're not doing it, this is what we're doing to do it.
Awesome. Okay, one last question.
Yes.
Are you pro jeans or anti jeans?
Oh man, I wear jeans all the time, so I'm good with it. No, we of course we actually have allowed more jeans in the district since I've got here, so I don't have a real problem with jeans. I think, though, personally, in an education setting, I'd rather see teachers wearing professional clothes personally. But the era that we live in, it's a different era, and I understand that, and I just shrug sometimes and go, I guess I'm becoming the old guy, right? Because that's what happens in life, right?
Right,
you know, it's like that rock and roll is just killing us, right? That's what our parents said about our music, and now we say it about our kids' music. So I think it's the same thing with, you know, but I do want people to dress professionally. I think part of the thing is I want education to, again, gain that professional profile. I've said this, excuse me, I sincerely mean this, not a light note, but I think it's important. I think what we're seeing in the tenor and talking points of people on television, people in our legislature, as it relates to public ed, are frankly not only erroneous in many cases, they're harmful. And having studied history a little bit, and not a lot of modern history, but some, I liken it to the way that our soldiers were treated when they came back from Vietnam. And at one point, our country, and I would take this back to Ronald Reagan, made a determination that we're not going to talk about our soldiers that way anymore. That we're going to honor them for who they are and what they do. And I believe in that. My wife served in the Air Force, so I strongly believe in that. But I think we've got to recognize that the tenor and the language we are using is affecting the desire of people to serve our country through education. And it is a service to our country as well as our kiddos. And I'm frustrated by that, and I would like to see it stop. Whether you disagree with something going on in public ed, just like you may disagree with something going on in the military, you need to stop talking as though every teacher is failing at everything they're doing. They know that's not the truth. It's a far cry from the truth. Great things are going on. I say this about our district all the time, and I want to do better, but we're 75% free and reduced, 25% bilingual, give or take, and 60% of our kids are going to an institute of higher education every year. That's a remarkable number against our history. I'd like to get that up around 80%, but 60% are doing that, 92% are graduating. We're seeing kids go on to incredible institutions with incredible performances in a variety of different places. And so I just think our legislators and our TV commentators need to stop and reflect on how they are causal in the problems that are occurring in recruiting effective teachers. They are part of the problem.
That's a good point. Changing the narrative. Like
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's great.
So.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with us today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you so much.
For being fearless.
Absolutely. My pleasure.